So I'm going to talk about our place in the data universe, really my place, and how I kind of figured out how an archivist fits in the 21st century. And I had to figure that out because people ask me all the time, especially people I work for at the SEC. They're like, "You're dust and paper? We don't have paper and dust." And so we're not dust and paper anymore. And so I've been at the SEC about 10 years. And it was 3 years ago that I was asked for the first time to speak on information governance. It was ARMA in DC chapter, and I like talking, and I said, sure. And then I realized, I don't know anything about information governance. I'm an archivist. I had never thought about it that way. Is that what I do? And then I had to start thinking about what I do. And so, this is a conversation about how my mind has evolved in my profession. Hopefully it has some insights for you all. And then I'm going to focus on a few projects and a few ways we're trying to tackle issues with technology and technology that creates issues. So I'm sure we've all stared out at the night sky. I'm lucky enough to have a second place in West Virginia. For those of you who know, a lot of night sky. Not a lot of noise pollution, different than DC. And I look out at the night sky, and I'm sure all of us have had this thought. Wow, I'm small. There's all this unknowable stuff out in front of me. I'm overwhelmed. Where's my place in all of this? Well, we, as human beings, started trying to find our place in it hundreds of years ago. We started staring at the sky. We started tracking the sky. We invented telescopes, spaceships, put astronauts in space. We have a space station. We have visions of other galaxies now and other planets. So we took our little selves and started expanding our knowledge with different tools and formats and ideas. And we started finding our place, or at least knowing more about our universe. And that's kind of where we are in the data universe. Every morning I open up my iPad, or I look at my email, or something streaming past me. Even if it's like the change on the TV where you've constantly got to stream. There's information, I'm going to say this because I don't have a better word, assaulting you on a moment-by-moment basis. And you start to think, wait a second, as somebody who works in an information field, I can barely make sense of this in my daily life. How do I help people in my professional environment make sense of it? So that's an existential crisis as well as looking up in the universe. And so some ways that I've looked at that is, we've been in an information age for going on our second century now. And it's changed. Early on in the 20th century, we started with computers, and we started saying, we've got so much data and information. Let's have something that can help us manage that data and information. And then it kept spitting out punch cards. For those of you who remember punch cards, magnetic tape, for those of you who remember that, and just reams of data. And then we're relying on the computer to give us, some sense of that data. Interesting enough, it wasn't, those of you who are historians in information engineering, technical engineering, I apologize, I'm not. I was more of a social historian when I studied at school. But what I found interesting is, up until July of this year, I had never heard of Charles Backman. Well, in 1971, Charles Backman created the Integrated Data Store at GE. What that was the first key into unlocking streams of data, creating database entry points where you could use data fields to jump ahead in a data stream. Prior to that, it was like the old cassettes. I'm a child of the 80s. I had cassette tapes in my car. You had to fast forward to the next song or listen to the whole tape. You didn't jump like you do now on your iPhone or other music appliance to one song or another, to hundreds of different albums or another. The technology was not there. There was not that engineering in place. So what I would say is probably data and information in computers had probably, 60, 70-year start on real data management. So we're actually probably still pretty new as a field. If you're looking at the early 70s, late 60s, where we're trying to make sense of this. And we have the opportunity to work in a field where information technology is jumping forward at amazing paces. And I just said cassette, and there's people in this room that probably don't know it. And I said punch cards, and there's people who don't know it. And the things that have changed in this century. So what I think, when you try to figure out how to find your place, there's a good questions to ask yourself. Are you a custodian of data, or are you a consumer of data? Well, the obvious answer is you're both. And it's how you view yourself on that line of both that brings value to your organization. So, archivists are considered often, the title is very useful. I often joke that I'm a certified archivist. That's very useful because I work with a lot of lawyers, and they're used to certifications. And now that I've been at the SEC 10 years, many of them know what an archivist is. But it was tremendously helpful when they didn't. And they just, wow, okay. I'm speaking to somebody who has, a certification. So that's been helpful. But they think of you purely as a custodian of data. But obviously, we just talked about our personal lives, and also in our daily professional lives, we're also a consumer of data. Being both gives us opportunities within our organization that maybe those going through the program side, the mission-related side, don't get a chance to reflect upon. Because, of course, they're both as well. But they don't feel that they have the professional task to be the former. So they rely on us with our expertise and our competence. And your expertise, when you're both, is extremely valuable. One of the nice things about this data stream that we're drowning in is people are more dependent on ever for people to make sense of it. The information isn't going away at the rate that it used to be. Even when you push delete in certain areas, it still exists in others. And then they're calling you to help manage that because there's a FOIA concern, there's a litigation hold. Oh, we uncovered this. It was very rare in the 90s when I began working at the National Archives that an agency would call me and say, oh, I found this old file that didn't go with the box of the other files. It happened, but it's extremely rare. Those files now never go away in many cases unless you've got really good data governance and a really good vision of managing that. So your expertise and how you can help people make their material more accessible, reliable, and usable, shareable is another thing, and disposable if possible, although I've got some different views which I won't even go into on disposability and how that's changing. That's a whole different conversation. But your expertise is more valuable than ever. So use that expertise within your organization, at least I have, to leverage yourself. And how do you leverage yourself, or how have I? My program is an honest broker at the Securities and Exchange Commission. We are not looked upon as part of the agency mission. Obviously, when you're on the administrative side of the house, you're servicing the mission. Nobody can succeed without you. And that's true on all parts of the organization I work with. My boss has security under him. He has building operations under him. He has FOIA under him. And then records management. And all of those are integral to people servicing the mission of the organization, but they're not seen as why the commission exists, which is perfectly fine. But when I go into meetings, or my staff goes into meetings, we're also not necessarily seen as a threat to the organization's funds, to the competing environment and mission. One office might play off another because they want certain staff. We're in a very tough federal environment right now. A lot of federal agencies have freezes. A lot of them have very difficult hiring environments. We're no exception. So if you can get into a conversation and you can bridge the gap as an honest broker, as somebody that's not there, now they're not going to say they see you as a threat, but there are threatening aspects to a competition of resources. In addition, because we have expertise and we're honest brokers, we're well placed to ascertain our organization's information management needs. And why is that? I consistently have to look across all of the divisions and offices in our organization. What are they doing? What are they gathering? What data streams are they all feeding into or off of? Where are they putting that data? Is it in different places? Is it in shared places? They're doing their jobs. The enforcement staff is going out there and attempting to keep the markets viable and safe by finding bad actors and making them punishable. We've got regulatory environment where people are trying their best to be sure that the proper regulations are in place and there's proper forms and filings from all the corporations so that there's transparency in the markets. That's the mission of our organization. A variety of others too, data analysis, things like that. For looking at market swings and why that might happen. But I have to look at all of that they're doing, how they're collecting information. Is that information often should be in the same place? Are they duplicating information? So I'm lucky enough to be an honest broker with a global mentality. What that allows you to do at the macro level is see these micro issues that are bumping up against each other and maybe not supporting effective, efficient, and good information sharing within the group. And then you leverage that. My personal opinion over the last 10 years, because, be honest, the funding environment has not gotten, it's gotten a little bit tighter, but it hasn't been great for 10 years. I mean, we've had continuing resolutions since, 96? I can't remember the last time that we resolved in the government our budget before May, usually now. And it used to be October, so we're going on, and you're trying to look at that environment. That's not an environment that's conducive necessarily to buying new things, unless you've got great justification. So what I try to do is look at our existing information technology and see, are there functionalities within that technology that we can leverage? Maybe not to revolutionize what we're doing, but to get more evolved in how we do it. And I'll discuss that a little bit. So we're going to start with email first. I'm going to say it here, I'm on record. I hate email. Okay? I don't just hate email because it keeps coming and coming and coming. It's that Seinfeld episode, right? And it was the same with the mail. I hate email because people think it's this great revolution. Well, I'm old enough to remember triplicates of memos. Email's an evolution of that triplicate of memos, except it's the added nightmare of you can add 500 or 600 people to the email, whether they need to know it or not. But what my view on email is, and I'm happy to have any discussion offline on this and why I hate it, it's a foundation of the silo that already existed in poor information sharing. It is a person-directed silo. If I don't send this email, you don't get it. If I don't send my version, you don't get it. If the next person picks up their version, we've now got multiple versions. We all know this problem. So what I want to say is, I hate email. Wow, I feel good. Everybody, you should get on stage and say what you hate occasionally. Actually, probably that's happening too often nowadays. But anyway, what I would say is, I may hate it, but I have to deal with it. And for those of you who are familiar with the federal rules and regulations related to email, around 2012, there was a presidential directive on managing records, government records, and that gave us a 4-year, the next year they came out with a directive from Office of Management and Budget, which gave us 3 years to manage our email electronically. And the National Archives came up with a blessed concept called Capstone. And I worked at the National Archives. I love them dearly. The mission is wonderful. My view is they weren't getting email. And that was a problem. And it was an organizational vulnerability when you're talking to Congress. And they're saying, why aren't you getting federal email? So they had to figure out a way to kind of cast a net to cover themselves regulatorily. So what they said was, If you have a certain role, your stuff's probably permanent. If you don't have a role, that stuff's not permanent. The Capstone concept. At the SEC, we've got about 106 individuals because of their role. Their records are going to be permanent. 15 years after their tenure at the SEC, we're moving it to National Archives. That's going to be interesting. I won't talk about their receiving capability at the moment, but that's going to be interesting. What I would say is we accomplished Capstone pretty quickly and easily, and how we did it was back to what I said, leveraging existing technologies. I had a lot of my colleagues call me and say, what are you buying to manage email? And I didn't want to buy anything. To be perfectly honest, we spent very little money. As a matter of fact, I don't recall how much we spent because we used existing resources on an existing contract. We were lucky at the SEC. This isn't an endorsement, this is just the reality. Since 2008, we were using the Semantic Vault, which has now changed names a couple times, but it's the Vault. And we had been keeping all of our email of every employee in the Vault since 2008. We talked to our contractors working that, our IT people working it, and said, are there some capabilities and some functionalities which we could turn on to make this serve this blunt instrument need? You're permanent, you're not. Turns out it was. And it was actually relatively simple. It wasn't a big project. It was a collaboration. I will tell you, I can talk about some big IT projects I've worked on. Successes are the collaborations when people don't know they're working on a project. Because often projects don't necessarily have a successful shelf life or even the idea that they're going to succeed. They just have a completion date. Collaborations have people who have specific needs. The SEC needed better management of email. We had a presidential directive. They wanted to work with me. So 6 months prior to the deadline, we were able to parse our Capstone officials and our non-Capstone. The interesting thing about that is, the con about that is, all of the temporary emails. 3 years from last October. So in 2020, October 1st, I could start pushing to delete on everybody at the SEC's email. That's not permanent. That's going to be wonderful. People are going to really love me for that. Because people aren't moving their email where it's supposed to be. They're keeping it in this receptacle, this silo. So I'll talk about how we're trying to address that in a second. But the lessons learned, I will tell you, there's a whole conversation on lessons learned about applying to Capstone. In fact, I tell my branch chief and my other staffer who worked it predominantly, you all need to get a presentation because nobody's being told of all the little twists and turns along the way, all the icons that go funny, all the messages that pop up that didn't exist before, just by changing rules. And then the communication plan that you have to explain to people why they're Capstone and why they're still important even though they're not. And also, why did my email just go wonky? And two of the lessons learned that we had is we found out that prior to enacting our rules, unread email never went to the vault. Well, that's a vulnerability on many cases. And I won't go into detail, but it's an interesting lesson. The other lesson learned we had was prior to turning on our rules, we have Outlook. Your Outlook calendar didn't go into the vault. So now, if you're a Capstone official, both your unread email and your Outlook go into the vault. Well, now if you're all officials, but if you're a Capstone official, it's kept as permanent. Those are both great things for transparency, but when you're talking to a senior official and telling them that they're going to probably have to figure out how to delete that doctor's appointment because of HIPAA or other non-record that they put on their official calendar, that's an interesting conversation that you didn't have to deal with before. And so we're looking at auto-classification and trying to figure out, I know how it works. I think many of us know how it works. But my main goal here is to get at that temporary email now. Prior to 3 years from now, well, I guess we're getting closer to 2.5 years from now, I don't want to shut the SEC down and say, move all of your case file material where it was supposed to have been, where your bosses have told you to put it for years. Move all your rulemaking files to that shared drive that it was supposed to have been for all those years. So how do I help people I help people by getting compliance and helping them do their job. It is inefficient and ineffective to keep that material in email. You've now siloed it, you locked it down, you haven't helped your organization. Your organization may not know it, but it's not running as efficiently, as effectively as it could because staff don't have the information at their fingertips that they want. In many cases, they've learned by culture not to ask for it because they don't expect it to be available. It's this unfortunate psychosis and the lack of knowing what you want and asking for it because it's always been a certain way. So what we're trying to do is approach it with, how can I, in my program, working with my colleagues in the information technology side, have 21st century technology solve a 21st century problem? Not the other way around, 20th century technology solving a 21st century problem. And one of the ways we're trying to look at it, and I don't think auto-classification necessarily is going to work with me, because what I found is drop-down boxes make people mad. And, you know, it's the old thing that I've been saying since 1996 or 98, the National Archives, referring to the study that says that people, you know, don't need more than 3 or won't do more than 3. People don't even want to do 1. And if you acculturate them to doing 1, all you're going to do is make them hate you a little less every time. That's just my view. Now, I'm always open to new technologies and here at work, so I'm not shutting it off. One thing I'm proud of always telling my staff is, be decisive but uncertain. People can't wait for you to make a decision, so you're going to hear me be very decisive, but nothing I say is certain. My view is, as soon as I'm certain about something, I stop learning. I stop asking questions. And worse, I might know something's wrong, but I don't want to change the way I'm moving because I was so certain of it. If you're never certain, all plans can change. So that, you know, I try to take that away. So anything I say today that sounds extremely decisive, it is. It's the way we're moving. But please, if you hear something, blow me out of the water with the technology. Show me auto-categorization like I've never seen before. But my goal is non-manual management. And I'm trying to look at artificial intelligence and machine learning to do that. My goal is not compliance, but how am I going to, those emails shouldn't be where they are. How do we get them to a new place that people can utilize to better information share and do their jobs? And that, you know, honestly, that's the theory. Limited user interaction, compliance by making people have a better, you know, working environment where compliance is just built in. The plan is much more difficult. And I don't have time today to go into all the details of the plan, but what I will say is the acquisition process in the federal government is difficult. The IT project environment in the federal government is difficult. IT professionals in the federal government are wonderful. They know their stuff. However, because of the acquisition and the project environment, what they want to know from me is, what are my requirements? And then we're going to build you that. One of the problems I have is, I'm not smart enough to know my requirements. Second problem I have, and why I love disruptive technology is, my requirements, even if I was an expert and knew them, they're short-sighted. I'm trying very hard to do my best to ask questions and to create a situation where people improve my life and give me something I can't live without. That's what we expect nowadays. We don't just expect data to be always available. We want to not live without something. We want to be blown away. So, you know, it's a very difficult environment, and I'm working through that through the market and acquisition process. Another problem that we're having, we've got an RFI on the street. It's open till the October 16th. When I did my market research, pretty much what the federal government was using, the 8 or 9 agencies trying to attack this issue, was auto-categorization. They didn't call it that. They said a new module's on the way. I can't tell you how many lectures I've been where that new module's been on the way for like 15 years. I don't like any of their tools. And I'm not naming anybody, I just wasn't thrilled. None of them, to me, are artificial intelligence, machine learning. Why is it that on the intelligence side, we have artificial intelligence, machine learning in the government? Why is it that we have artificial intelligence that can read the faces of everybody in here and tell you what your emotion is? There's corporate environments with artificial intelligence. They're attacking very important stuff. Those functionalities can be turned to records management, information management, my belief, and they could produce a lot of wins. And it's not just the compliance wins, it's helping people do their work. So I'm being pretty hard-headed on this, and if my RFI doesn't work out, I'll come up with something else. My goal isn't to just solve the problem for the moment, is to try to create something that's revolutionary in my environment. So, back to space. I don't know if anybody recognizes this. These are the TRAPPIST planets that we discovered. I guess what I'm trying to look for here is something I don't even know exists right now in my environment. But I have hope that if I'm stubborn enough and I'm coherent enough and on occasion eloquent enough, we can start working together to advance to a different need, which is, as information professionals, our goal is always to make our colleagues and the people we work with and advise life better. We're actually data disruptors. People just don't know it, but we make their lives better. We give them things, if we have the right vision, that they can't live without. Wow, we're all working on the same draft at the same time, and I'm not producing 300 drafts. People don't even know, but wait, their life just got better. So what I would advocate for, and what I'm trying to do, is look for the technologies that get us to that. And then just briefly, I'm going to talk about a couple other projects. Well, I'm going to talk about this project because this blew my mind. It also shows value added in an organization. And then I'm going to talk about, my current idea for using functionalities. And a lot of people are going to make bugs when I use it, but I'm going to talk about the environment I live in. So, personal and shared drive management. Last year, or the end of this fiscal year, it ends in October, it ends in September, through traditional records management, paper, moving stuff off site, my office saved the SEC $25,000 in space. Well, we're all taxpayers, $25,000 is good. We've been working with IT last few weeks, looking at personal drives. We call them F drives. So they're not the drives that your colleagues have access to. They're just a drive on your computer that's backed up. Not your hard drive, but your shared drive. I mean your personal drive. And we started examining where we were with personal drives. And everybody says storage is cheap, storage is cheap. Storage is pretty cheap. I've got a lot on my phone over there. But then we started doing the math. And we found out that we had 19,000 drives, 19,000 plus drives at the SEC for staff who have been gone from the SEC. So I'm not even talking about the people working there. We got 6,000 people. I don't even know how long it took us to accumulate 19,000. Obviously, we have contractors and others. 19,000 drives that we're storing right now, migrating and managing. Why? Because nobody asked me if we should. And I wasn't smart enough to know I even had this problem. We identified that 12,000 of those drives were from people who had been gone at least 3 years. Very simple. Worked with my colleagues in my office, my records officer. I hire people who have certain orthodoxy because I am not orthodox at all in records management. And I want them to make sure that I'm not being totally insane. So I like to say the insane thing and say, is that legal? I know what's legal. I've been doing this a long time. But I often hey, here's some gray area. How gray am I right now, And what I said to them is, for those 12,000 files, provided we follow all of the proper rules and regulations, look at, FOIA concerns, litigation concerns, what if we just delete those after 3 years? We give the organization 3 years. There's a certain argument that those could be even argued as non-record and be deleted immediately. However, I tend to look at them as potential notes. and things that you decided not to share. So I wanted a little bit of, I looked at the general record schedule and looked at what we put in place for email and said it's defendable. If we're going to hit the delete button sometime in November, $750,000 savings immediately. I've just provided value to my organization beyond that $25,000, and I've just had people say, wow, I don't have to migrate this stuff. I've just made IT's life better. So now suddenly, from expertise, they see me as competent, which is the next jump, right? So we realize real cost savings, and we're working through roles and responsibilities. We're working with policies and guidance, and we're figuring that out. Here's the issue. Shared drives is a whole different ballgame. And I hope anybody can come to me and do solutions now on that, but we did a little look at our shared drive. So I've had policies and procedures in place. I have 14 staff. You wouldn't think they'd be doing that much as creating shared drives and folders and files. And for the last 4 years, we've been doing regular deletion for records management on a general record schedule for records management, information management, following to disposition. I've been okaying a lot of deletion on folders that we don't need. They're related to servicing requests and other things. Our share drive has 120 gigabytes of data and over 30,000 folders. Our share drive for 14 people that we've had guidance and management, and I know that I've said delete multiple times, I swear, even that email silo, I can pull them back, has over 200,000 files within those folders. Wow, I'm not the paragon of success, am I? You can't hold me up at the SEC, so we looked at the greater SEC based on that. It was more, I'm going to say, rather, when I worked for Alan Weinstein, he used to say, never say you have a backlog, always say you have a surplus. Well, I'm going to say, instead of being depressed, I was awe-inspired. At the SEC, we have 926 terabytes of data on our shared drive, 505,000 plus folders. I don't even remember the file count. For those of you who want some kind of measurement, although it's debatable, people say if you take all the printed information in the Library of Congress, it's 20 terabytes. If you take all of the information in the Library of Congress, including the video and the DVDs, you get it to 300 terabytes. We've got 926 terabytes at the SEC. How do I even begin to talk to people about naming conventions and best practices? Yeah, let's shut down the organization for I don't know how many years, and let's organize our share drive. So one of my hopes is that any technology that I am able to find that turns its attention to email through business analytics, data analysis, would also be able to begin managing the share drives. Because, I don't need to take on a futile exercise just to, slow down the organizational mission. But what I'm doing right now is trying to leverage existing tools. And so when I said everybody, some people in this audience would say, oh, I've said it too. But the reality is we have SharePoint. And people aren't using it. And some of the things that SharePoint does is some of the things that people are asking for, which is version control, which is not this accumulation of multiple folders for different individuals, but more of the opportunity to have collaborative operations and tools. It's the environment I exist in. I have, speaking of orthodoxy and unorthodoxy, I've got some SharePoint preachers on my staff. I've got a certified SharePoint expert. I've got another person who's worked very hard and long in the federal environment in SharePoint. SharePoint's not a solution for me, but it's a tool. And here's how it's a tool for me. Two things. Not many people right now in our organization are using it because they're not trained in it and they think it's complex. Secondly, well, let me go to the first because I lost my place, sorry. So that the fact that they're not using it and they're not trained in it gives you the opportunity to create an environment, a culture of use before things have gotten out of control. How do we get people utilizing this environment? The second thing was, whenever we've been in conversations with people looking for information technology tools, they keep asking for functionalities that we already have in SharePoint that they're not utilizing. So my thought to my bosses is, why don't we just turn on those functionalities first, use an existing tool that we've paid for, find out its vulnerabilities, find out its success rates, and then move on to the next tool. Let's not buy something and establish it. If we bought something tomorrow, we could create that cultural environment through training and policy, potentially, on use that would minimize the nightmare that's shared drives. But let's use what we have first. Let's get people acculturated to a better corporate environment and how they use their information and minimize duplication of the information. And let's have the existing functionalities. And when those functionalities fail us, let's ask for the next functionalities. So I know I said earlier that I want to give people something they can't live without and people something that's revolutionary rather than evolutionary. I would say also I work for the government, and sometimes I got to use the tools at my expense. So just quickly, that's where I am. Where I am is try to find value in your organization by people thinking you're competent and like your expertise. Try to be an honest broker in your environment. Get a global knowledge of what you do and how you do it. And then try to do your best to leverage existing tools. Thank you.